to the Maxim Institute podcast. My name is Jason. I'm the Communications Manager at Maxim, and I'm delighted to bring you this episode on a vitally important topic, a war for your wallet, the cost of living crisis election. In this episode, a recording of our most recent Maxim Institute Conversation Night, you'll gain a deeper understanding of the issues at hand and the potential outcomes of the upcoming election. You'll come away equipped with the knowledge to make an informed decision about who will best serve your needs. Discover which party has the solution to your problems at the pump, supermarket, and bank. Uncover the strategies that can alleviate the burdens of the cost of living crisis. Knowledge is power, and so arm yourself for the cost of living crisis election. Let's join Maxim Institute Executive Director Tim Wilson as he introduces our guests for the evening, Josie Pagani and Cameron Bagri.
Josie Pagani is the Director for the Council for International Development, which is an umbrella organisation for New Zealand aid agencies. She formerly worked at the OECD in Paris and is a member of the New Zealand Government's Aid for Trade Advisory Board. She's a regular media commentator on current affairs. She actually speaks a lot of sense because I've disagreed with her on a number of occasions. On live radio, and has been involved in think tanks around the world, including Global Progress and the Copenhagen Consensus Centre. In this capacity, she has advised ministers, prime ministers, and governments. Welcome, Josie.
That sounds very impressive.
Yes, that's you.
Yeah, some of it's not quite true anymore. But yeah.
Now, Cameron Bagri has been an economist for 20 years, but we're not going to hold that against him. In fact, that's why he's here. For over 11 years, he was the chief economist at ANZ, heading a team that was consistently ranked number one for its analysis of the New Zealand economy. He developed a reputation for taking a forthright stand on even the hardest of economic issues. He's also worked as an economist at the National Bank, Treasury and Statistics New Zealand. Could you please put your hands together for our panellists? All right, well, let's start with just how bad is it, Josie? How bad is it out there? And this can be a mixture of observation, data, and anecdote.
Well, I mean, you mentioned just before the people who are buying tickets to go and Taylor Swift. I mean, just look at your own lives. I've got friends, we were just talking about this, I've got friends who are just doing a 3-month trip around Europe. And I'm going, where's the cost of living crisis for them? You know, so there are some people who are doing okay, and we were talking about this before, that it's people who've got savings, who've got, you know, assets, who've got houses, who, you know, doing pretty well with the interest rates they're getting in the bank from savings. But, you know, things are bad. So I look at it globally. I mean, you know, I look at aid and development. I mean, 60% of people globally in the poorest countries are very close to debt distress. So that's, you know, people who weren't on the breadline who now are. First time.
And what is debt distress? What's that?
So debt distress in the poorest countries is where, you know, you can't pay your debts, you can't pay for food on the table, you're dependent on aid charities and so on. You know, and another statistic that I've got here, I mean, the share of the world's population living in autocracies has risen from 46% in 2012 to about 76% now. So the impact I think that this cost of living globally is having on our politics, not just in New Zealand, it's all over the world, that, you know, autocrats and strongmen are doing really well. But, you know, in New Zealand, you know, you just have to look around. The number of food banks. I mean, just the other day, the petrol prices go up. I was one of the people in the queuing, as we were saying before, just saving $15.
Who wouldn't queue to save
and it's like,
$15?
you know, you haven't seen that since the 70s and carless days. So, you know, and I look at myself. You know, I'm working. My husband's working. I would put myself down as sort of downwardly mobile, middle class. And, you know, we're struggling. It's not easy. I'm worried about how I support my kids at university. I sort of think, well, if something, you know, they get into trouble or the car breaks down, I'm not sure we can help them out. So I think it's, you know, it's really tough. And we'll get into the reasons why. So I won't get into that now. But I think this has been partly a problem a long time coming. You know, I think we've basically deindustrialised New Zealand, and high-paid working-class jobs just, you know, are are leaving the country when those industries leave the country. So we were already in a bad place, and then things we can't control in terms of the cost of living, in terms of war in Ukraine, in terms of supply chain bottlenecks. They're tipping us right on the edge. I think the economy is right on a precipice, and he's got the facts, figures.
Cameron, right on the precipice, what are you seeing?
I've got some good news, and I've got a fair bit of other news. Look, on some levels, we should celebrate some of the things that have taken place over the past 3 years. Navigating COVID, unemployment rate 3.5%, strong wage income gains out there across New Zealand. There's a whole lot of things that suggest we're sort of headed in the right directions. There is also a good old-fashioned dose of reality. Put your hand up if you're under the age of 50. That's most of this room.
There's a few liars I saw. Yeah.
Now, if you are under the age of 50, odds are you are not in the workforce and seeing the destructive impact of inflation or what it takes to break the back of inflation. Because you've got to go back to the late 1980s, early 1990s. And it is brutal. You actually need to beat your economy up. So when you talk about paying to date, now, I'm not seeing unemployment move up massively. What I am seeing is that inflation is still 6.7, and 6.7 is a long way away from 2. Now, to get inflation down, demand needs to come down relative to supply. People need to tighten the belts, and that's tough. We've experienced so far what I call is the appetizer on the main course. The main course is the back half of 2023 and 2024. And for most of society, this is going to be a massive wake-up call because they haven't experienced what it takes. And it is difficult. And what we got across New Zealand at the moment, probably our biggest challenge is division. And when you've got a lot of division across society, it becomes economically unhealthy, and it makes it really hard to facilitate change and get you back in what's called our economic lane. So as an economist, we try to keep the economy sort of going from left to right, but you don't like to stray too far away from where you should be. We've undertaken a whole lot of experiments for a number of years which have sort of put us off on a goat track over here. And what we're now starting to see is that what we call, it's popcorn season. And popcorn season is all about things popping. The current account deficit, 8.5% of GDP, our national checkbook with the rest of the world. Local authority finances, $1.6 billion deficits. Crown accounts are now deteriorating because guess what? You hit firms with higher costs, they make less money, they pay less tax. Company tax down 25% in the last 3 months compared to 12 months ago. These are the reality checks. Probably the one that worries me the most at the moment is that I challenge anybody in this room to pick a better economic indicator as to where New Zealand is going to be in 20 years than the education outcomes we're seeing today. And if you ever look at education outcomes today, you are going to be very concerned about where we are going to be economically in 20 years.
I saw a Westpac statistic, I think, which said that about 43% of New Zealand households are in worse financial distress than they were a year ago. And, if you look at the sort of long term, you talk about a current account deficit nearly 9%. I mean, that's just, we're not paying our way in the world as a country, right? So, there are several ways you can deal with that. Either you earn more as a country, but that takes a while. It's about productivity. You've got to invest in the right stuff and grow the country. Or you cut spending. That's really hard. Or you sell stuff, or you borrow. And we've been doing the last two a lot. So we've sold a lot of stuff. We've borrowed. And that's why you see kind of private jets at the airport because they're, coming here to buy stuff. So, those aren't long-term solutions. In fact, they're put us in a worse position financially. So that's the country. So then when this, when the cost of living crisis hits, the stuff that we just can't control, but we're not in a good position to respond to that. I mean, where are the good jobs coming from? Where are the good wages coming from? How are we going to pay our way in the world?
Is it helpful then to look at how we got here? Josie, you said this has been a long time coming. We did an event with Brad Olson last year, who said that in terms of the Reserve Bank stimulus package, that was overcooked by 90%. Now that's his view, and I can see Cameron's making some faces there. But when you say, can we unpack how we got there, because it could help us get out?
So yes, there was a massive government stimulus, but I would ask anyone in this room, would you not have had the wage subsidy? Would you not have had the support for business? I mean, you think the Reserve Bank at that time was weighing up, do we risk inflation or do we risk a collapse in the economy of jobs, of businesses, and a lot of social distress? So they made the right call on that, I believe. Now, you can argue, I think legitimately, that could they have tightened sooner? And yes, they could, and they've even admitted that, right? That they were late to start dealing with inflation, and maybe they didn't think it would be this bad. But even the IMF, when it slagged us off a couple of weeks ago for spending too much, bad quality government spending, they said that the Reserve Bank was doing the right thing. So I don't think. I mean, Brad can. I know has got the numbers around that, but the counterintuitive, the opposite, you just imagine what that would have been if we hadn't done that stimulus and you didn't have the wage subsidy, you didn't have support for businesses.
Okay, Cameron.
You got it, right.
Have a drink.
I'm going to need a top up. You need to differentiate here between the short term versus the long term, right? And if you sit there and think about what really matters is not the economy over a 2 to 3 year period that can be hydraulicked up pretty easy by low interest rates, overinflating your economy, too much government spending. What really matters is the 5 to 10 year picture. And if you have a look at where New Zealand has been, where we've been breaking down for a long time, is that, and it goes back decades, your low productivity growth, low income growth. Yeah, we've got some major social deficits here in New Zealand that are not just social deficits, the economic deficits, and they're intertwined. Yeah, the quality of New Zealand's education system, we can't just point the finger at the current government. They need to put their hand up for a fair bit of it, but this goes across multiple governments. New Zealand's poor quality infrastructure, the healthcare system across New Zealand is an absolute goddamn disaster. Now these sort of things over time are now starting to creep up on us. Anybody driven around the Waikato of late? Yeah, and you need a ute to be driving around the Waikato because.
Well, you're not allowed a ute anymore, Cameron.
Well, I've got one, but you need, because they're navigating the number of potholes, and that's a function of not just the current government but the previous government. So what we've seen for a long time is that successive governments, and this is one of the big problems we've got, is that it's short-termism. As opposed to stepping back and thinking, what's the long-term plan in regard to where are we actually going? And I'll give you an example, right? If you see it in the past week, the government has announced an inquiry into banking sector profits. And they've limited it to personal banking. Personal banking, mortgages, that sort of stuff, is 40% of bank profits. They've ruled out 60%. Yeah, that's the business sector. Yeah, that's the part that drives the economic base that wellbeing is built upon. So these are examples where we get caught up in the short-term dynamics and we don't really want to embrace some of those bigger picture challenges. Brad's right to a degree. Did the Reserve Bank get it wrong? Yes. Did every economist get it wrong? The answer is yes. Did anybody expect that the government was going to, Grant was going to spend $65 billion in 3 years? Well, he did. Adrian printed $50 billion and now he's lost $10 billion of it as mark-to-market losses come through. But we needed to do that because we didn't know at the time. But let's not lose sight of the long-term picture before we start to point the blame in regard to the short-term stuff, because the long game is a lot more important than the short game.
And actually you could live with the stimulus and that billions of dollars spending by grant if it was quality spending, and it hasn't been quality spending on the whole, right? So the wage subsidy, yes. There are other things, yes. But, spending on Auckland Light Rail, Lake Onslow, these sorts of things, okay, they haven't spent that yet, but the plan to spend on that stuff is just ridiculous. I mean, it's about $60 billion on stuff that we can't afford. I mean, to put that in perspective, it's about the entire education budget, I think. You could buy everybody in Auckland a Tesla for that money. It's just stupid money, and at some point it's too much. I mean, I had a really bad education. We were talking about science before. I didn't get a science education, and now, this moves ahead to change the science curriculum. I didn't learn about the economy. I didn't learn about economics. I've had to learn late in life because it bloody well matters. And, productivity, I had to work out, what does it mean? How do I define productivity? Paul Krugman, economist, says that, productivity isn't everything, but it almost is. And it's so true. If we don't earn enough as a country, if New Zealand isn't earning enough, and the country isn't enough, and we haven't got enough jobs paying good salaries, we don't have enough money to build hospitals, to pay for health services, to build schools, to have good education, to pay teachers.
So look, I'm going to go big here. If there's anything that's at the heart of our productivity issue, because it's something that comes up regularly, what is it that's at the heart of and I'll flick to Cameron and then come back to you. Why is our productivity so low?
Some of it we can point down to economies of scale, tyranny of distance, this sort of stuff. If you look at New Zealand through a broad macroeconomic framework, we actually tick a whole lot of boxes in regard to we've got the right institutional frameworks in place that we should be doing an awful lot better. We're not. Is there any magic bullet here that's going to suddenly turn New Zealand around productivity-wise? The answer is no. One of the maxims that there's a stuck in your name in there.
Nice work.
That I'm thinking of.
Get that man another drink.
That I'm thinking of at the moment. Look, when you go through tough times, the temptation is to think about or go for real big bang things that you think are going to be magic bullets or magic potions. Magic potions don't exist. We need now to think small to stand tall. When you get back to economic basics, or what we call the fundamentals, you've got to focus on all those little things. And once again, I come back and think about just the potholes around the country, quality of your healthcare system. If we don't have a well-functioning housing market, then, or you're building a whole lot of intensified houses that odds are they're going to turn into ghettos 5 to 10 years down the track. That's not going to be great for New Zealand. Don't get the education system right. My daughter's 16 and she'll be horrified that I tell the story. She is going to get 4 NCEA points for doing a mud run. So this is now what happens across the education system. You take a day off school, you jump on a bus with 30 other kids and you ride through a bit of mud and you're going to get NCEA points. Now, to be fair, it's about building resilience and this sort of stuff that is life skills, but sorry, that's just a load of crap.
I've got a niece who I would say she would be 14. She has only had so far this year 1 full week at school because of teacher-only days, strikes, etc., etc., etc. Maybe your odd mud run. I mean.
So my youngest son, when he was at school, they were building the expressway in Wellington and Transmission Gully, and I have never seen a road being built. I mean, it's fascinating. From the peat and the ground up to see a massive road being built like that was incredible. So I went to school and I went, hey, you guys taking the kids out and teaching them about how you build a road and getting them excited about engineering? No, they were doing a whole a sort of term-long course on composting. So he's doing engineering now, I have to say, but you're right. I mean, I get the way this question gets framed a lot, used to get framed a lot about productivity was, we've got to do volume to value. And after about 10 years of talking in the media about volume to value and still not really knowing how we do it, it's really hard. How do we go from logs on the Wellington waterfront to becoming an IKEA of the Pacific? Why are we not the IKEA of the Pacific? Why are we not doing amazing things with wood? Cheese. My auntie is a master of cheeses. Now, she would go, why are we selling milk powder to the world? Why aren't we making distinctive cheeses here that are completely different? And what's the answer to that? Well, some of the answer, I think, is R&D, just as you say, do the small things right, invest in R&D. So our R&D, I think, is less than 1% of GDP. In Europe, it's about 2%. In the US, it's about 3.8%. Why do they have Silicon Valley and things like that? Because they actually invest in it. But it's not just government investment or tax credits. It's also business investment in R&D is really low. I think that's lower than 0.8% GDP. So, and that comes also, I think, to our business culture. We've got really low-level management skills and leadership skills in our businesses. So how do we improve? You look at countries that have high productivity, they've got really good managers, really good business leaders. Competition. When did you last see, you think of the banks maybe, but supermarkets, the phone industry, when did you last see them being disrupted by an incomer that kind of changed the business model and they had to quickly adapt and improve what they do? No, they're very comfortable, thank you very much.
And maybe that's it. There's even though things aren't perfect, and this is almost like our New Zealand acceptance, she'll be right. So good enough is okay. Let's
Now,
just.
well, that's on a.
Yeah, go on.
New Zealand has got the 3 Bs attitude. We aspire to the batch, the boat, and the BMW, and that's sort of it.
I think the BMW's a bit outdated now, Cameron.
It's Tesla, Cameron.
Yeah.
Well,
it's a Tesla.
But life is pretty comfortable.
Yeah.
Big problem across New Zealand. You put your
So what
head
you're talking about is an aspiration, gap in some way.
Yeah,
I quite
Probably
like
not
those
the
3
bad-
things, actually. They sound
probably
quite
not
good.
bad example, but we probably need a little bit more like the Australians, which is a bit of a bad example, but it's people are probably pressure. They're just a lot more competitive. By Christ, they want to win. They want to do well. They're just a lot more upbeat. Same with the poor old people in the UK have been beaten up in the past few years, but they're a lot more jovial than us, a lot more aspirational about where we're going. Yeah, we've got to shake the tree, and I guess have a look today. What did I see in the newspaper? Mortgage rates moving up. Bad news sells. What also the media did not report on was that term deposit rates moved up. So someone loses, someone wins, and we report on the losers. So we like negativity.
Welcome back. I'm sure there were some good ideas there. Now, what I want you to do too is keep in mind that if you have a question, shoot it to this number, and that'll form part of the Q&A. You don't have to shout it from the back. I mean, we like a pub vibe here, but we'll try and keep it a little bit restrained. Let's just quickly. We touched on it just as we were exiting this section. I want to bring it up again. Winners and losers of the situation we're in. Josie.
Well, if you've got a house or houses or assets and you've got savings, in other words, if you've reached the top of the hill and you've made it and you've got some wealth behind you, whether in assets or shares or whatever, you're okay. You're doing really. In fact, you're doing doubly okay, because not only are you now getting higher interest rates on your savings, but you're also not paying tax on your wealth. Now, we have a debate about tax, but the reality is we are one of the few countries in the world that doesn't tax income, the income that you make off wealth, the same as the income you make from wages, right? So, you've got a tax-free bit of wealth, and you're not paying tax on it, and you're also getting high interest rates for the savings that you've got. So, then you're doing all right. But that's not many New Zealanders actually. I mean, people here might have a couple of houses or a house, own their own house. You're not at that level, and it's still pretty hard. So most people are doing, worse than they were a year ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading stories on websites. I was about to say in the newspaper, but of course, such a thing does not. It's apparently it's the 21st century. But my income is 140,000, and we're going back. I never thought we'd be in this position. Cameron, winners and losers. Josie said something about winners. Maybe you want to touch on losers. All winners. Fill your boots.
There's an adage, a phrase I used way back in 2007 to describe what was around the corner in the form of the global financial crisis. And the adage was, when you eat like an elephant, do not expect to pass wind like a mouse. So I guess if you want to look at the prospective losers over the next 2 years, they are going to be those that benefited the most over the past 2 to 3. You've got to turn the construction cycle. You've got to turn the durable spending cycle. So motor vehicle sales, all this sort of stuff. Asset prices need to go backwards. And that's going to be pretty brutal for some parts of the economy. Some parts of the economy, such as healthcare, are just going to chug on. They're relatively defensive, infrastructure's defensive as well. But if you look at through a pretty simple lens, inflation in general is not friendly for society. And one of the aspects of inflation which is not talked about enough at the moment is not just that siphoning petrol effect as money gets drained out of your pockets. It's the impact on businesses. Business cost inflation got up to 9.7%. Farm cost inflation is running at 15%. And that's why food price inflation is running at 12.1%. We're still seeing at the moment what's called PAYE, income tax. It's still up on last year. Company tax, as I talked to earlier on, company tax in the last 3 months is down 23% on the same 3 months of 12 months ago. Now that's a precursor of what's going to lead, which is what's called job losses. And if you think we've got a divisive and crime-unfriendly society at the moment, with unemployment at 3.5, scroll forward 12 to 18 months and have a think about what it could be like with unemployment at 5%. And that's what really worries me here, in regard to we enter into a period where things are going to get tougher, where we've got an awful lot of division, and we've got a whole lot of structural social problems entering into this. And if your economic base crumbles, which it's crumbling, those social problems are going to get worse. And we're going to need to be really smart in order around how do we mitigate the negativity or those problems going forward. And that's not easy.
Actually, and when you're talking about an erosion of trust, and Josie, you were mentioning earlier the autocratic regimes, the amount or the percentage of autocratic regimes has increased. Edelman does a trust barometer, and I looked at the deck that the local company Acumen has produced, interpreting that for New Zealand. Economics is at the heart of the erosion of trust in institutions. So you look at trust in governments decline, trust in the media, and you look, say, at measles, mumps, rubella uptake for those vaccinations, way down. So there's an erosion of trust here that is connected to economics. How might it play out, do you think, in terms of where Cameron's talking about the next 18 months? What do you think,
we've got
Josie?
an election, yeah. So the erosion of trust in politics is really concerning, because when people start to lose trust in the institutions that are meant to be there to help them, whether it's government, whether it's media communicating with you, where do you go? And as Cameron says, you're looking at real social fragmentation. And I blame both sides of politics for that. So, if you look at the left, a focus on, there's a great quote from a colleague of mine in the UK who worked for Tony Blair, and he said, you just got to do the things that voters say are the things. So the problem on the left in the last sort of, 8 years or so, 5 or 8 years, is that with the focus on identity politics, the focus on climate change, all of these are really important things, but is it the things that voters say are the things? No, it isn't. What we have to do is look at the Ipsos polling, cost of living, crime, cost of housing, equality, inequality, and so on. Actually, climate change is quite far down there. So it's not saying you don't do that, but are you talking to people about the things that matter to them? So that's the left. On the right, there has been this sort of, the market will sort it out, the market will work it out, government's got to get out of the way. Well, no one in a town in Northland ever said, well, I lost my job, but, at least aggregate wages have gone down. It matters if you are losing your job, and it matters. No one is going to say, well, it's okay because, maybe this is across the whole country, maybe this is better for New Zealand. We've got to look after those communities that are really suffering. So trust erodes.
I would also say that the right has become preoccupied with identity politics too. So there's almost been a migration away from, I'll say it, but I say it in inverted commas, bread and butter issues, towards more abstract ones. So I think that's on both sides of...
Yeah, and I mean, Chris Hipkins, when he came in and started talking about return to bread and butter issues, it really resonated with people because, it's like, we'd quite like, you think about the Labour Party, we'd quite like you to return to your historic mission of distributing, fairly the wealth of the nation to working people. You haven't actually done that yet, last time I looked. So... that return to bread and butter is really good. I think what has happened for Chris Hipkins is that he's, great start, and he's reached a point where I think he's reached the sort of limits of his authority in that caucus, where he's not able to get rid of some of the stuff that he should, i.e., Auckland Light Rail and things like that, which are costing too much.
You're talking about bread and butter is fine, but you got to execute on the delivery of the bread and butter. And that's the big challenge at the moment. If you look, I'll go back. Helen Clark I will put down as one of New Zealand's best Prime Ministers. Now, I disagree with Helen Clark and Michael Cullen with a whole lot of things, but I will still put them down as leaders, even though on some levels I disagreed with what they were doing. The problem we've got in New Zealand, and it's a global phenomenon, is political leadership has now been replaced by what can only be described as populism-driven rubbish. And that's driving division or voters looking at the periphery. What you're seeing now is that politicians will stand up and they'll just promise people stuff. Well, sorry, when you go through what's called negative supply shocks, you're actually poorer as a society, as an economy. You need to adjust. Now, you're not going to see politicians get out there and tell that sort of message because everybody likes to get ahead. And unfortunately, that populism.
So you're saying politicians aren't telling us the truth about the situation.
Well, it's actually... Sorry, Cameron.
I think politicians are underestimating how much they've lost the respect of society. And it's a big issue, both in central government and local government. The Howland Clarks, they walk into a room and they had presence, they had mana, there was just something about them. They had a bit of ethos, ethics, authenticity. You might not have agreed with what they stood for, what they said, but you respected them. One of the things that I'm noticing, and it's a global phenomenon, right? You think about, we complain about our lot, but you think about who they've had up in the UK with old Boris and Liz Truss, and she lasted as long as a lettuce. United States, you got Sleepy Joe, they had old Donald Trump, and this is a global problem in regard to what we're seeing at the moment, and it makes it really hard to bring or put on a united front. Once again, I go back to division, I think, is one of New Zealand's and the global economy's biggest challenge, because when you get division, it makes it really hard to foster change and bring society and an economy together.
And Josie, you've actually, to to the issue of politicians, you've spoken about a kind of managerial class that's entered the political arena. So the number, for example, of working class people who are actually MPs, that's disappeared. People who actually had recognisable jobs. We were talking about this earlier. The amount of plumbers in Parliament. How many plumbers are there in Parliament? There's none.
So it didn't used to be like that. And in the 70s, there was about 70% of the Parliament, I think it was about that, were from the professional managerial class, right? They came straight from those jobs into Parliament. And then, about 30% came from clerical or trades or whatever, straight from those jobs. So, yes, you've got people who identify as, working class people in Parliament, but they haven't come straight from those jobs, right? They've come straight from a managerial role. Someone once said to me about the Labour Party in the UK, it used to be that people joined the Labour Party to make their life better off. They came from that community. They were miners, Keir Hardie in the mining towns of England. Now they join the Labour Party to make somebody else's life better off. And so that's part of the problem with the left, that it's become a slightly sort of tilted head of compassion. I'm here to make your life better off. A couple of things about what Cameron was saying. There's a book out at the moment on Trump, which is called something like Political Hypocrisy. And it's absolutely devastating analysis, because it says that people knew that Trump was lying. He was an oaf, he was obnoxious, he behaved appallingly in the debates with Hillary Clinton. They didn't care. He lied authentically. They looked at Hillary Clinton and maybe she was telling the truth, but she did that political thing of hedging the answers, of being overly polite and fake. So the problem you've got now is that you've got this sort of culture of politics where, it's kind of the professional politician, which is sandpapered off the kind of mission, the crusade of politics, where you go in to persuade people of something. You're passionate about something, you want to make a difference, and people will disagree with you, and you'll fight and you'll argue, and you'll persuade or you won't. We've lost that. So I heard someone describe it as the Ming vase politician, and I think this is probably Christopher Luxon's problem, that you're being overly careful and risk averse. The Ming vase politician walks across a dance floor carrying a priceless Ming vase, terrified of dropping it. And the opposite of that, I suppose, is a politician that's kind of, carrying a tray of drinks across a dance floor and trying not to spill it.
Tripping.
Yeah. And we want those politicians.
Dancing.
We want politicians who are going to go, as Cameron says, these are really difficult times. Tough decisions have to be made. It's either this or this. Am I bringing you with me or am I not?
And I would say, I think in terms of the Trump phenomenon, I would say that the political father of Donald Trump was actually Barack Obama.
How are you going to... Looking forward to this, Tim.
Okay, because he was a creature of the establishment, fundamentally, but he campaigned as an insurgent. So he set the appetite for change. That was the word that was repeated so often through that campaign in 2008. And when he came in, there was very little change. So we're looking also, and I think this goes back to the notion of a political class, is that when the political class doesn't replenish itself, it gets replenished externally by figures like Donald Trump. This is, we're starting to move, I think, into the area of politics. It seems appropriate now to talk in terms of the election that's coming up. So you would imagine that we've got a recession, we've got a cost of living crisis. It's the number one Can
we call it a reset as opposed to a recession?
Right. It's not a recession.
A reset.
Yeah,
okay.
Cameron's on record.
Yeah, can you put your hand up, right, if you think the last 5 years has been normal. Right, it has been normal.
Has been normal.
Yeah, printing all this money, spending $65 billion into a $350 billion economy. It's been nuts, right? So what we're going back from is abnormality to normality. Now that's a reset. That offers opportunity. The problem is, across this country, we're going to use the recession word. And as soon as you use the recession word, that's a negative word.
The technical recession.
And
people
get their
Josie's trying to make peace. I love it.
Yeah, shut up, Cameron.
Cameron wants war. Josie's trying to make peace. This is why they're here.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the government currently, the incumbent government. Is this reset/technical recession/recession? Is it going to be good for them or bad for them? Your take, Cameron?
Well, I'll give the government an A for aspiration and an E for execution. Right, we've gone, ideology is now getting checked by economic reality. And what we're seeing there is, as I said earlier, it's popcorn season. More and more stuff is starting to pop that illustrates ideology does have real economic consequences. And that's sort of going to drag us back to into our economic lane by hook or by crook. If we push against it, the economic adjustment is going to be far harsher. But, ideology is out, economic reality is back in play. And that's going to be a big adjustment for certain parts of society, and it's a big adjustment for some politicians who have no concept of economic reality.
I don't see it as particularly ideological. I mean, I think there's the bread and butter, the pitch for bread and butter policies was absolutely right. It was spot on. I think there's a sort of cynicism that's kicked in that they're not really, doing the things that voters say are the things. They're certainly trying to, and I think with the budget, things like free prescription was a good policy. I know it was unpopular with a lot of economists who are going, well, it's a stimulus, it's a small stimulus, but I think that was really popular. But I think, the problem for the government, which has been the problem all along, and if I think about the quote that Jacinda Ardern said in the week that she resigned, when she's doing all the media interviews, her valedictory speech, she said a quote which I thought was really revealing. She said, politics isn't just about what you do, it's about how you make people feel. Well, actually, that's wrong, right? I mean, yes, it's how you make people feel in a crisis, and she did that brilliantly. You stand up and you emote the feelings of a nation after a massacre or during a pandemic.
That's actually almost a sacramental role,
right?
In some ways,
yeah, exactly.
But I think obviously that's politics has leached into that.
So
area.
it's a part of politics, but your day job is what you do, and that's where I think these kind of what I would call kind of weather vane politicians rather than signpost politicians. That you're kind of going where the wind is taking you, rather than actually going, I've got a vision. Some of it's going to be tough, and this is where we're going. And again, it comes back to that politics as a vocation rather than politics as a profession. And I think the problem for the government now is that they're full of a bunch of, backbenchers, most of which you couldn't even, identify in a crowd, who are suddenly getting promoted because there's a sort of, honestly, the turnover in cabinet is greater than your average takeaway at the moment. So people
I wish my takeaway had that turnover, to be honest.
People are being promoted at a rapid rate. And what you're seeing, I think, is that they don't really know why they're in politics. There's not necessarily a political philosophy or theory that they're falling back on. So I don't think their problem is over ideology so much as they don't really know why they're there.
And yet we see, you have an incumbent government, been around for a while, economic straits, and yet the polls don't appear to fully reflect that. Why is that?
I think the polls are reflecting that, but not quite in the way that you think. So you think the government has gone from close to 50% in 2020 to 30-odd% now, right? So that's a big drop. It would be even further if Chris Hipkins hadn't come in. And what you're seeing, which is kind of what Cameron was talking about, is that the fringes of politics, so ACT is doing extremely well, 15%. Te Pāti Māori's gone up to 7% in the latest poll. That's amazing. It's remarkable. So what you're seeing is people going, and I think that Te Pāti Māori success, that vote, is a lot of former Labour voters frustrated with the lack of delivery, who are going, never bugger you, I'm going to vote for these guys. So that we think the rhetoric that's coming out of Te Pāti Māori has been quite extreme. I don't even think it's particularly that they're responding to. I think they're just going, I'm not going to vote Labour, I'm going to vote them. So I think we are seeing it in the polls.
I think people are looking for substance. And I'm not seeing an awful lot of that offered on the table.
Are they seeking substance in the margins, Cameron?
Well, what's going on is that people are there, if you don't see substance in the middle of the political spectrum, which is where I think most people sort of reside, right? And there's an awful lot of criticism, but there's not an awful lot of, could we call it tough love policies? Sorry, this is, the next few years could be pretty tough, and we're going to support those most in need, but you people over here, you're probably going to need to pay a little bit more. What tends to go around is when we support, we throw money around like confetti. The fuel subsidy was a classic example. Why should someone like me have received that fuel subsidy? Didn't need it. That money should have been far better off being targeted into working for family support. So even then we try to support people, we don't get the policy framework right in regard to putting it to most in need. And the politicians do not like to stand up and deliver substance and tell people, well, sorry, life's going to be a bit tough and you just got to dig in. But I think there's a big lot of society that's actually looking for just give us a bit of a plan. We don't mind if things are going to be tough for the next 12 months, if you can give us a vision what we're going to be like in 5 years. The problem is we don't have that mix.
Do you see that anywhere on the political landscape?
No.
No. There's a saying, people go around saying, oppositions don't win elections, governments lose elections. Completely wrong. I mean, yes, that can happen, but the government has to really self-destruct for that to be a winner for the opposition. Oppositions, even if we're sick of the government, there'll be a lot of people going, well, I'm not just going to give you my vote by default because I'm sick of the other guys. You've got to have a plan. You've got to have something that you're going to go, this is how the problems that you're having will look different under a national government, and they're not doing that. And if you look at the US and the UK, you look at the Labour parties in opposition in the UK. Rachel Reeves, the shadow finance spokesperson, went to the US recently. She's in opposition. She's working really, really hard to come up with what she calls a muscular industrial plan, how we're going to not just buy British but make British, So everyone's noticing that. So it's like she's getting ready for government. In the US, opposition's obviously the Republicans, they're in a complete chaos, but you look at Sleepy Joe Biden, but at least he's coming up with a plan, or his government's coming up with a plan. They've had a massive infrastructure bill. They're pumping money into building stuff. They're closing the borders. It's make America, buy America, which is really bad for us in New Zealand as a small country trying to trade. But you look at those politicians, and the thing that they're doing that no one in the political spectrum is doing here is coming up with that plan.
Do you see a lack of vision on the right as well as on the left, Cameron?
Yeah, I go back to what I said, it's this word called substance, and it's not there. And one of the things that really winds me up of this, people, they put the spectre of tax cuts on the table as sort of delivering nirvana and what we need to do to help with cost of living support. And I challenge anybody, look at the quality of the education system we've got today, look at the healthcare system infrastructure. Do you really think we can afford a tax cut which goes at the expense of fixing those other problems? The problem we've got is that I don't think people would mind paying more tax if we could deliver results, outcomes on the other side. So we're having the wrong debates. People are not communicating basic concepts easily. We now spend more on New Zealand superannuation than what we spend on the entire education sector. Right? That just doesn't pass the basic smell test. More money going to the grey force as opposed to the future workforce. We need to have some real rich debates about that sort of stuff, but that involves ripping off the Band-Aid and politicians to be brave and stand up for what's right.
Okay, I'm going to ask you guys to be brave. I want you to pick the outcome of the election now, here, judged on based on what we've been talking about and what you understand about politics, having been observers, and also your understanding of you're out and about a lot, what you're sensing in the people you talk to, the people that you discuss this kind of thing with.
Yeah, Cameron.
Right, so I'll come at this from an economic perspective, and economically, taming inflation, which we're only partway through, is going to mean tougher economic times for the next 12 to 24 months. Yeah, so I think it's going to be increasingly difficult for the incumbent government to get re-elected, subject to the opposition political party, the main one, National, delivering a bit of substance on the other side. One of the big things that I'm going to be looking for in the next month or so is when I see the list, is that the preacher-plumber ratio. Yeah, and the preachers are those traditional politicians that come through the stock standard circles. They go up through the political hierarchy and they talk a big game and this sort of stuff. What we need in politics is a lot more plumbers, a lot of people that are politically inept. You do not take them to a gathering, but they're bloody good at what they do. And these are the people that any government is going to need to have more involved in. Because once again, when the rubber hits the road and you go through research, you need to get people involved who can deliver. And this is your Chris Finlaytons, your Tim Grosses, these sort of people.
There's a poll. Oh, it was actually it was basically a series of polls and surveys, but it was over 11 countries done by YouGov in the UK. Over 11 countries, very similar to New Zealand. So New Zealand wasn't in it, but we're very similar. And it showed that inflation is this massive political wrecking ball. You know, for the first time ever in YouGov polling, there is more majority support for some kind of tax on wealth. Now, that's not because people are suddenly going, oh, the bloody rich, they need to pay more. It's that they're going, I think I'm paying too much. I think I'm paying more than my fair share. So, and in New Zealand, I think it's 54% of people support some kind of wealth tax. Again, for the same reasons. It's like, times are hard, we've all got to pull ahead, we've all got to do our bit, and I'm doing too much. The other thing that's the first time ever is that this majority support for public spending, and you kind of go, right, how can that be after so much stimulus? But it's only if public spending is spent in my local community. So I want to see my police station resourced, my libraries resourced, my kids' after-school activities resourced, and so on.
So then the configuration that would deliver those two would be a Labour Greens to Party Māori configuration. So you're picking Labour Greens to Party Māori?
No, I'm not. I'm definitely not picking anything. It changes every week, Tim. Okay. Like some weeks I'll go, National have got it, National and ACT have got it. I think the problem for National is that they're going after ACT. They're worried about ACT because ACT are doing so well. And the reason ACT are doing so well is they actually got some substance, right? And I would say the same with the Greens, who sort of plateaued at about 9%. But at least they're coming up with some substantive policy that a lot of people disagree with. It's edgy, it's crunchy, it's something that you can disagree with or passionately agree with. So it's on the edges, you are getting some more substance, and I think people are gravitating to that. The mistake that National's making is thinking we've got to cannibalise ACT's vote. What they should be doing is moving to the centre. And if Christopher Luxon could stand up and use the word inequality or working class, you would suddenly go, like only Nixon could go to China, you would suddenly go, wow, that's unusual, that's unexpected. I'll listen, because it's National Party talking about the need to close the inequality gap and build in the regions and so on. That's the mistake I think they're making. On the left...
I'd use a different word. I'd use equality of opportunity. We want to live in a society where everybody gets the same chance. And there's a whole lot of kids out there that start 50 to 100 metres behind the start line. So forget about the whole co-governance stuff. We've got a responsibility to take everybody up to the start line. And that might involve some parts getting more money than others, so long as they can deliver results. But once again, it's about framing language that's more connects with people, and it's not hard.
Okay, we're back with you. This is the Q&A. I've got some questions here. Just can I have a show of hands? Who thinks that the incumbent government, Labour, will win the election? Hands up. Okay.
This is what you think will happen, not what you want to happen.
Yeah, what you think. Okay. All right, we've got oh boy, there's a lot of... Cameron, are you going to run, please? Cameron for Finance Minister.
That's Lou.
That's Lou Bridges. All right, look, let's start. There's a great question here. What are you hearing from any party regarding policies to grow the pie rather than merely dividing it up?
Do you want me to go first, or you can go first?
Well, I mean, there's one thing that the government has done recently. They're funding a science park in Wellington, right? So that's a sort of R&D type thing, I guess. But, I mean, I think it's what we've talked about all evening, the sort of paucity of substantive policy that's really going to grow the economy. And I mentioned right at the beginning this sort of deindustrialisation of New Zealand that's happened over the last 6 years, where, in the name of mitigating climate change, we've banned oil and gas, which means that we're losing potentially Methanex, steel, timber mills have closed, North Skog closed. These are well-paid jobs, working-class jobs that are going, and what's replacing them? We can't all be software designers and baristas. So I'm not seeing the plan from either party.
Right, so I'll give you an example. All right, so the government played the political card with limiting the inquiry into banking profits to personal banking. If you really want to make a difference, you would have opened that up across the business world, because that's where we don't see competitive pricing, transparency. It's harder to shift, and the flow of capital and credit is a pretty critical part of an economy's economic development. So, the incumbent government ruled it out. I called a National Party figure and says, what is your view on limiting this to personal banking? Please put me in touch with a spokesman. The person gave me a call in 30 minutes, and I said, well, what's your view? I'll need to get back to you on that. That was last Monday. Now, what that illustrates to me is that they can talk a big game in regard to, we're pro-economic growth, that sort of stuff. There's not a lot of stuff that they've got concrete in regard to how they actually want to deliver it on the ground. And that's the frustration, is that, we hear a big game about growing the economy and importance of the economy. Give me some goddamn substance in regard to policy initiatives.
I think the problem for National is that the policy that we're seeing is kind of like the classic hits from National. Nothing unexpected. It's crime, it's gangs, it's tax cuts, and maybe subsidy for early childhood education. That's a little bit, that's interesting, it's a bit different. But until they stop playing the classic hits, they're not going to break through that 30%, which is what they need to do.
Is Labor playing classic hits?
I think Chris Hipkins is trying to...
I think they're trying to play classic hits, aren't they?
Well, I think they're trying to return to bread and butter. They're trying to return to the basics, right, and get that right, which is the right thing to do, because they've gone way off-piste somewhere around, identity and lifestyle, and I think they're trying to bring it back to the classic hits, which is what they need to do. Problem for National is the lack of kind of, I think, innovation and a sense of energy about doing something a bit different.
Okay, here's a question. My grandfather bought his home without wall linings or floor coverings and moved in to save up for the upgrades that could be added over time. How do incomes versus cost of living today compare to past generations?
Well,
so if you look at an easy one, is the cost of housing.
Yeah.
Right. So house prices decades ago used to be 4 times the median household income. It's now up around 9. It's about 11 times the median wage. Now, that's delivered an awful lot of economic growth over 30 years, because New Zealand's got wealthier by selling more expensive houses to each other. It's not actually real wealth. It's artificial wealth. And what that's led to is inequality, fragmentation and crime. And if you want to get housing affordability, back into realistic levels? Is intensification the solution? Partly. You've got to release land. I mean, the International Monetary Fund was out there a couple of weeks ago saying exactly that. But this is once again a preparedness to be bold and look fundamentally differently about where we are. But yet, countries around the globe, the interest rates went down for 30 years. Yeah, and when interest rates go down for 30 years, a whole lot of people in society make a goddamn lot of money. Like, you didn't need to be a genius to work out to buy assets. And that was advantageous to some parts of society. The problem is the social consequences of that, i.e. a portion of society doing really well, is now starting to see political, social blowback.
Yeah, to sum that up, the average wage can no longer buy the average house. That's the problem we've got. And the solution was actually relatively straightforward, releasing land, but also I think if the government had identified a single problem, i.e. social housing, and just done that, a sort of Michael Joseph Savage approach, just build social housing and build heaps of it, we'd be in a better position today.
Yeah, but even the response, and I see it around, we are building houses because in 2019, 20, 2021, the top issue on the Ipsos Issues Monitor was housing. So what did the government do? We just needed to build a whole lot of houses, and KiwiBuild was a dog with fleas. So now we've alternative mechanisms, but we're starting to build a whole lot of houses. What are we not doing? We're not building communities. And if you build houses, not communities, watch the social fallout in 5 to 10 years, because it's going to come.
Getting financial, do you think the Reserve Bank's target band will or should increase in the near future?
For inflation?
Yeah.
I mean, that's being debated. I mean, Cameron will be more insightful about that than me, but I know it's being debated across the world about whether or not you have to have, rather than having a 2% inflation rate, maybe we need to be realistic and have it, up to 3%. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, but what I do think is really important, there's been debate about the dual mandate of the Reserve Bank, and some saying, we should just go back to having an inflation target, we shouldn't have an employment target. Well, if that had been the case, you imagine during COVID, when you had a government with fiscal policy pumping money into the wage subsidy and so on, supporting businesses, you would have had, legally the Reserve Bank would have had to undermine that by putting interest rates up, which would have completely made it useless that you're trying to stimulate and keep jobs going and stimulate the economy. So I think the dual mandate has to stay. But whether we keep it at 2%, I don't know. What do you think, Cameron?
Dual mandate's a red herring. Right. At some stage in the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to have a big debate about the inflation target. And the reason we are going to have a big debate about the inflation target, because the economic costs of containing inflation, getting it back to 2%, are going to become a lot more real. And the real variable here is unemployment. And that has economic and social consequences. And the temptation will be to shift the goalposts. Now, you cannot shift the goalpost today when inflation is a long way away from 2% or even 3%. But the question is going to be asked, because we've been in a 30-year environment where inflation has not been a problem. In fact, for 10 years of it, we were so concerned about inflation being too low because we couldn't get inflation to 2%. But a lot of the forces that supported low inflation, such as globalisation, demographics, the baby boomers saving for retirement, all power to the employer at the expense of the employee, rising profit share of GDP, declining labour share of GDP. A lot of those forces are now reversing. And on top of that, we're shifting to what's called a world of scarcity as opposed to abundance, use of natural resources. Now, the transition to a more renewable, climate-friendly society, now that begs the question, is 2% still the right number? My personal view is that 2% is not the right number. I think probably somewhere around 3. When do you flag your target goes to 2 to 4? Not until you got headline inflation south of 4, because otherwise you lose your credibility. But I think that debate is around the corner.
There's also a commentator who is making the rounds in America that says that at 4% you're also eroding government debt. So there's a very strong argument internally within policy circles, perhaps, with this debt, it looks so big. I know how we shrink it. Am I being a cynic, or would that play into that?
I think the debate is more what Cameron was talking about, which is that the cost of trying to keep it at 2%. Socially, in terms of, job losses, in terms of sort of communities breaking up, the fragmentation of our politics. I mean, all you've got to do is look at something like, a country like Greece. If we don't sort this stuff out, it will be sorted out. It's a bit like going bankrupt. You go bankrupt slowly and then very quickly. And, we've got to turn round that productivity problem we've got, turn round that current account deficit where the country has not earned its way in the world since 1974, when Norm Kirk was in power, when colour TV was introduced, when Vietnam War was happening. That's the last time we balanced the books. And, so no, you're right, you can't blame one government for that. And certainly I feel like we've been talking like a stuck record about this for so long. If you had a political party that was coming up with a plan for that and talking about it in a way that made sense to you as someone who wants your community to be better, you want your kids to get a good education, you want a decent job, you want to feel like everyone's getting a fair go, then they would deserve to win the election. This
sounds like Josie Pagani for Prime Minister.
As long as he's my finance minister, I'll be fine.
I would be hopeless.
Great. No, you'd just
Why would you be hopeless,
You'd
Cameron?
just be unpopular with some people, which is good.
I'm not. I've got this unfortunate Central Otago characteristic where a spade's a goddamn spade.
Yeah. Don't you love it?
It's okay. So here's the thing: the election occurs, and you're the Prime Minister, Cameron. What's the first thing that you would do to fix the issues that we have been discussing tonight?
It's not fixing the issues. Look, you want to give me an hour, right? But what would be my main priority?
What's your main priority?
Right, it would be education, because I look at that and I just look at it simply. I challenge anybody to pick a better economic indicator today as to where New Zealand is going to be in 20 years than the educational outcomes we're seeing. So that will be my biggest priority in the near term. And that's a long-term story. The inflation, there's a whole lot of stuff you need to do there, but to me, building blocks in New Zealand is about educating the kids. Because they're the guardians of New Zealand tomorrow, and we're failing them.
I would... I think we've got the tax system round the wrong way, and unless we think that, not taxing those who are making an income off assets or invested wealth or whatever, if we think that the people at the top of the hill, that's enough wealth, New Zealand doesn't need any more, because at the moment we're taxing the people coming up the hill who are making the wealth of tomorrow. So it's not an envy thing at all. I just think the balance is wrong. Now, I'm not supporting the Greens wealth tax as a version of that, but I do think I would like to see a tax switch where we actually cut tax off income, and cut tax for those who are still working up the hill and making the wealth that's actually going to pay our education system tomorrow, and just balance it a bit more so that in every other country they define income in the same way. Income from wages, income from invested wealth, income from assets is defined the same way. So I think that's the priority I would do. And the immediate one I think I would do is reform the policy-making machinery in government. So I would do something about the public sector, which is a problem. It needs to be separated from those that implement and those that design and come up and innovate and come up with the ideas. Because at the moment, the risk is all in the wrong place. There's no risk encouraged in ideas and innovation. All the risk is in implementation. You look at Waka Kotahi, reason we've got a whole bunch of potholes. So just chuck money, throw it around, who cares? Whereas we want to be actually putting the risk in innovation and ideas. So I'd separate public sector. I'd beef up select committees so that oppositions can actually do the policy work in opposition, come into government ready to govern. And I'd reduce cabinet to about 6 people, because it's actually only 6 people who are doing the work, and the others
Actually,
can
it's
bugger
probably
off.
about 3 in this one, but anyway. Okay, last question for you. Maxim is an organisation that hope is important to us. What is something hopeful that you see, just very quickly, that we can leave on, and then we'll wind things up? A hopeful sign. Help us out, guys.
Look, we're a compassionate, tough, community-focused people who call a spade, and who will be loyal to the nth degree if you give us something to believe in. So my hope is actually in New Zealanders. You know, I think if you can tap into what it is that makes us Kiwis, the values that are important to us, which actually Jacinda Ardern did in 2017, which is why so many people voted for her. She just didn't deliver on it. Then that gives me hope, actually. We'll demand the right politicians, so just keep demanding the right politicians.
Right, so I sit on a few boards, and one of the things that I constantly ask management is that, what do we have that's different, that's unique? Because your ability to compete and do well is always defined by what's different within your proposition. And I guess if you apply that not just at the business level across New Zealand, the great story is that we've got a whole lot of things that are unique, that are fundamentally special. You know, it rains here a lot. You know, we've got a big economic exclusive zone.
That doesn't sound very hopeful.
Well, it's good. You think about the word of climate change, and we moan about it down here. You go look at prospects for a whole lot of other countries, or what's happened in the last 24 hours around the globe, hottest day, all this sort of stuff. We're actually pretty uniquely placed. Aquaculture, economic exclusive zone in regard to New Zealand. We're overweight, we're rich in renewable resources, and that's where the world is shifting. So we got a fundamentally unique proposition that can differentiate ourselves within the global marketplace. And then you get down to layer 2, which is layer 2 is about the fundamentals. Just make sure you get those things right: access to markets, the right allocation of money coming out of banks, the development of skills, your education system, the right infrastructure, innovation, R&D. Level 3, get the right people in the right places. And this is not just about CEOs leading, this is about the quality of your institutions around Wellington, the right advice. And then layer 4 is innovation. Right, R&D, just 1 + 1 now equals 11 as opposed to 2. But it's not hard, right? Some basic business principles apply in regard to how we need to be thinking about things in regard to New Zealand as a whole.
Ladies and gentlemen, Cameron Bagri and Josie Picani, put your hands together.
Thanks for listening to the Maxim Institute podcast. If you'd like to hear more from us and keep up with the rest of our research and analysis of politics and policy in New Zealand, you can sign up on the homepage of our website to get our monthly forum email and invitations to future Maxim Institute events. You can search and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. From the team at Maxim, mā te wā. Goodbye for now.